Hi guys, welcome back to Cernys Kids. Today we are going to a virtual road trip to Washington today.
All right, guys, we're going to go to the state of Washington. If you don't have it, go to our website. Get your downloadable map. There's a link on our homepage, as well as there's a blog to our journeys. You can either create your own or follow along with us. We're going to talk about Washington. Let's find Washington on our map.
Right here.
That's right. So the borders are Idaho, Oregon, the Pacific Ocean, and Canada. So I have so much to talk about Washington. I had a hard time picking and choosing because there is a ton of things to talk about in Washington. So it was the 42nd state that joined the U.S. in 1889. Capital is Olympia, but the biggest city is Seattle. It is the leading producer of apples in the U.S. Apples. About 60% of the apples that are in the U.S. come from the state of Washington. They're also known for raspberries and sweet cherries. So about 90% of the raspberries come from Washington. And funny enough, Washington, do you know whose name is Washington?
George Washington.
That's right, George Washington. So it is the only state in the U.S. that is actually named after a U.S. president. So that's a funny little fact too. And it's known as the Evergreen State because you want to know what, guys? It is green, really, really green, and there are trees everywhere. So one of the main industries in Washington is lumber. So that's kind of interesting too. So we're going to talk about quite a few things today, and if I start getting low on time, I'll just add things to the description because I've got so much to talk about. We're going to start with talking about Boeing and doing a Renton factory tour, as well as talking about the Museum of Flight. So do you guys know what Boeing is? No? All right. Boeing is a company that actually designs, manufactures, and sells airplanes as well as space rockets. And so their headquarters, or I should say all of their manufacturing and design, is in Washington, the state of Washington. And so we also wanted to talk about the Museum of Flight too, because the Museum of Flight is an air and space museum. It's a non-for-profit and it's a privately owned museum that was established in 1965. And it has the largest collection in the U.S., or one of the largest collections in the U.S., of air and space stuff. And so they also have the largest kindergarten through 12th grade educational programs in the world for air and space too. So those two resources, Boeing as well as the Museum of Flight, has a ton of virtual things that you can do. Not only for kids, but I actually quite enjoyed it too. Jamin and I watched the Boeing Renton plant tour, didn't we? Mm-hmm. And we got to see them make a 737 MAX airliner, didn't we?
Yes.
Which was kind of neat. So the 737, as probably a lot of people know, is a fourth generation 37. So a lot of people who know about Boeings, they actually take off the 7. So it's called a 37 airplane. And its first flight was in January 29th of 2016. And so they also have the assembly line. In fact, in Boeing, the Boeing assembly line in Everett is the final assembly line for Boeing planes. And so it happens to be the biggest building in the world where they assemble these planes in Everett, which is kind of crazy. So Jamin, tell them a little bit about the video you watched.
So when the planes are built fully, and then they fly them.
They do a test flight?
They do a test flight. Then they fly 30 miles to another place to paint them.
Oh, yeah.
And also, every paint color has different weight.
That's true. That's true. So the paint, whatever color they choose of the paint, it depends on the weight of the plane. That's right. So different paint colors weigh different things, which is kind of interesting. Did you know that every 1.8 seconds, well, before COVID hit, I guess, 1.8 seconds, a Boeing plane takes off or lands in the world?
No.
That's kind of crazy too. I know. Cool fact. But anyways, definitely do recommend going and doing the Boeing Renton tour, factory tour, as well as checking out the Museum of Flight so you can take a look at a whole bunch of stuff. The Museum of Flight has a whole bunch of experiences that you can do, as well as a whole bunch of different airplanes and stuff that you can actually tour, which is kind of neat. All right, let's move along. We're going to go a little bit north from Renton and go downtown Seattle and talk about the Space Needle. Do you guys know what the Space Needle is? It's that thing, and it looks like a spaceship that sits.
Yes,
outside.
I know what the Space Needle is.
Yeah, so the Space Needle was built or started construction in 1961, and it was built for the World's Fair. And so it is an icon or a city landmark for Seattle. And in fact, it's really well known. It's one of the most photographed structures in the world. So another cool thing about it is it has nearly 20,000 visitors a day. So at any point in time, there is a ton of people there.
20,000.
Yeah, there's a lot of people there all the time. So it has an observation tower, and it also has a restaurant. And the restaurant is the second revolving restaurant in the world. So the tower is 605 feet tall.
That's
so
long.
It's
Taller
very,
than
very
me.
tall. So if you go onto the Space Needle and you look at the information, you can actually do some 360-degree views. When you get up at the top, it's really kind of cool because you can see as far as Mount Rainier. You can see looking the other way, looking at the Olympics as well, and you can see all of downtown Seattle. It's really a pretty view. All right, let's move along. We're going to talk about one of our favorite things. Do you know where I'm going? Travel. Well, no, one of our national parks.
Oh, national parks.
Yay, we love our national parks. All right, so there's quite a few in Washington. The Olympic National Park is one of them, but we're going to talk about Mount Rainier. And we're going to talk about Mount Rainier because I think it's one of my favorite places in Seattle. It's great for hiking and stuff like that. I did a lot of it when I lived there. But Mount Rainier has an elevation of 14,411 feet tall at the very, very top. And it's part of the Cascade Mountain Range. And so the Cascade
Mountain?
Yep, the Cascade Mountain Range.
Me and Daddy went
Yeah.
all the way to the top of Cascade.
You're talking about when you went skiing in Wisconsin? Completely different mountains. So the Cascade Mountain Range is actually mountains. And it's in Washington. So yep, that's part of them. That it is. In fact, let me tell you a little bit about it. So it's actually a volcano, and it last erupted in 1894. And so it's considered one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world.
Wait, is it a volcano?
Yeah. So it's on the decade volcano list, which means that at any point in time, they're kind of watching it because it does tremor still. And the reason why it's on that list is because if you go down the mountain, it's actually quite populated. It's the Puyallup River Valley, and because there's so many people that live there, if it does ever explode, there's a lot of people's homes and lives at risk. And so that's why it's on that list. But the reason why is because at the top, there's a lot of glaciers. And so that could produce a lot of massive landslides and stuff. With the lava, yeah. So it's kind of crazy. So another mountain that's part of the Cascade Mountain Range is Mount St. Helens. And that one's famous because it actually did have an active volcano, and it exploded March 2nd of 1980. So, and actually, if you see Mount St. Helens, it's got a nice curve at the top where it blew its top. So it's kind of crazy. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about, and probably another one of my favorite things about Seattle, is Dale Chihuly. Dale Chihuly is a glass artist, and I think he is phenomenal. We have had the opportunity to experience a lot of Dale Chihuly stuff. He's had exhibits in some places that we've seen. They have him in Chicago. They've had him at the Desert Botanical Gardens in Phoenix. And then all over Seattle, you will see some of his
Paintings?
artworks. No, he does glass blowing. And so glass blowing actually involves taking a glass, and then they use a blowpipe, like with the fire, and it really kind of,
I know that.
yeah, and it makes the glass. And so you can go on to Chihuly Glass and Garden, and you can watch how they make glass, which is really, really cool. Again,
Could we make it?
I don't think so. We can go and watch somebody. In fact, when we were in Italy, remember in Murano, they had glass blowing. And did you remember? I don't know. We kind of snuck in an area where we could see some glass blowing. So it was kind of cool. Sorry, my husband's saying something to me in the background. Niagara Falls. Oh, my husband said we might have seen some in Niagara Falls too. I don't remember that. But anyways, regardless, Dale Chihuly is awesome. The Chihuly Garden and Glass, definitely go take a look. You can see how they make it. Dale Chihuly is the one who wears an eye patch. And so if you see him in the pictures, that is actually who he is. He actually is from the Seattle area, Tacoma, and he still lives there, and he calls it his home. And he has a lot of great pieces scattered throughout the Seattle area. All right, guys, that was our virtual road trip to Seattle. I should say Washington, even though we focused a lot along the Seattle area. There's a lot more to Washington than Seattle and the Seattle area, but there's a lot of cool things everywhere in Washington. It's a cool state. So anyways, that's our virtual road trip. Thank you for coming along.
Bye, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe, guys. See you next time. Bye.